Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here for our ethical debate on neurodiversity affirming practices in applied behavior analysis, or ABA. Before we get started, let's take a moment to introduce our team. First, we're going to start off with Miss Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara. I have been a registered behavior technician for 2 years now at an autism center, and this is my fourth semester at Ball State, and my plan to graduate in December of 2025.
Hey, thank you, Kara. Next up, let's hear from Ayla.
Hi, my name is Ayla Goodson. I have been in the field for almost 2 years, with an anticipated graduation date from Ball State in December of 2025.
Thank you, Ayla. All right, moving on to Nani.
Hi, my name is Nani. I've been in RBT for about 2 years now. This is my first semester in the master's program, and I'm hoping to become a BCBA.
Great, thank you, Nani. All right, let's hear from Madison.
Hi, my name is Madison McGrew. I have worked in the field for about 3 years, and my anticipated graduation is July of 2025. And I also hope to become a BCBA one day.
Great, thank you, Madison. Finally, my name is Kaylin. I've been working in ABA for the past 8 years. My anticipated graduation is summer of 2026, and I am looking to become a BCBA. All right, moving on, let's talk about ABA. So ABA is one of the most widely used evidence-based interventions for supporting individuals with autism and related developmental differences. Traditionally, its focus has been on measurable changes in behaviors viewed as socially inappropriate or non-functional. In practice, this often translates to teaching children and adults to learn to mask, suppress stimming, and follow instructions, regardless of whether those behaviors are distressing, uncomfortable, or even harmful to the individual. So in recent years, a growing number of autistic self-advocates, researchers, and clinicians have raised concerns about the long-term effects, saying that these practices, though often well-intentioned, have led to lasting emotional and psychological harm. Many report being taught to suppress their natural behaviors, mask neurodivergent traits, and prioritize compliance over autonomy, dignity, and self-respect. These experiences have prompted a larger discussion around ethical responsibility and the need for ABA to evolve. So out of this movement, neurodiversity affirming practices have emerged. Instead of pathologizing neurological differences, this approach embraces them as valid expressions of human diversity. Neurodiverse diagnoses like autism are not a flaw to fix, but differences to understand and to accommodate and celebrate. The goal is to support individuals in ways that are meaningful to them, not necessarily to make them appear more neurotypical. Neurodiversity affirming practices are grounded in client-centered care. They focus on promoting autonomy, respecting lived experience, co-creating meaningful goals, and ensuring interventions are not only effective, but also ethical, affirming, and sustainable. The BACB Ethics Code from 2020 emphasizes dignity, respect, stakeholder involvement, and cultural responsiveness. As behavior analysts, we are ethically obligated to stay within our scope of competence, minimize harm, act in the client's best interest, and remain culturally responsive. So today we will explore these questions through multiple lenses. We'll discuss how neurodiversity affirming ABA aligns with ethical standards, how it promotes long-term well-being and self-advocacy, and what challenges and criticisms it faces in real-world application. We'll also address important counterclaims, such as concerns around safety and the limits of affirmation. So our thesis is the following. Board certified behavior analysts, BCBAs, have an ethical responsibility to adopt neurodiversity affirming practices that center client identity and autonomy while still maintaining safety and effectiveness as outlined in the BACB Code of Ethics. Together, we're going to explore both the promises and complexities of this evolving approach to ethical behavior analysis. So let's begin, starting with our first main point, prioritizing lived experiences. So this first key point is the importance of prioritizing the lived experience of our clients. Behavior analysts must recognize that individuals, especially those with autism, bring self-awareness that could shape treatment goals. Respecting lived experiences includes using client-centered goals, encouraging collaboration, and honoring personal values. So we'll begin with our summarizer, followed by our researcher, then our illustrator, and finally our fielder who will help guide reflection and discussion. So Kara, if you could take it away.
We all have experiences that we have gone through in our lives. For this claim, we will be talking about the importance of making sure that we keep in mind how our clients' life's experiences can contribute to the care and interventions that they receive. The first article by Mather et al. 2024 talks about neurodiversity as a whole and how neurodiverse practices can be implemented into making sure that the client's perspectives are at the forefront of the mind. Ming et al. 2023 also discusses the importance of how collaboration with others can affect the client as well. Lastly, we will talk about the BACB codes of 2.09, which is involving clients and stakeholders, and 2.15, which is minimizing risk of behavior change interventions.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Kara. All right, Nani, if you could take it away.
Yeah, so we'll start with the Mather article, which offers practical recommendations for making ABA more neurodiversity affirming based on feedback from autistic individuals themselves. Though not an empirical study, the article draws on personal narratives, literature, and ethics to argue that treatment should center client values, autonomy, and consent rather than normalizing behavior. The author stresses that autistic individuals are experts in their own experiences and that services should focus on improving quality of life in ways that reflect those experiences. A limitation is a lack of empirical data and that it may not represent all autistic voices, but it still represents an ethically grounded call to action for more client centered care. The second article is Ming and others, which highlight the power dynamics between practitioners and autistic individuals, emphasizing that knowing about autism doesn't equal understanding the lived autistic experience. So they argued that ethical care requires centering client voices and approaching treatment with humility and curiosity. The authors urge behavior analysts to reflect on questions like whose voice is centered and who benefits most to stay accountable and avoid harm. While the chapter is philosophical rather than empirical, it encourages critical reflection and supports the need to prioritize autistic perspectives in care.
Thank you so much, Nani. All right, Madison, if you could describe the slide.
All right, so as Kaylin said, I will be describing the infographic that is here on the right side of the slide. So this just goes over a few different ways that behavior analysts can prioritize the lived experiences of their clients when providing services. So a couple of those are prioritizing autonomy and consent, enhancing quality of life, centering goals around the client and their values, recognizing and addressing ableism and biases, and then also collaborating with recipients of services.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. Ayla, if you could take it away, please.
Okay. So what we'll do before I take it away, I'm just gonna give the floor um for our counterclaim, and then I'll loop the question in at the end.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. All right, so for our counterclaim, it's important to acknowledge that ABA is not widely accepted by many within the neurodivergent community. Critiques from autistic adults, like those reported by Anderson 2023, reveal that many have experienced ABA as harmful, reporting feelings of loss of control, identity suppression, and pressure to mask their diagnoses. Baden et al. 2024 further highlight low social validity ratings for certain interventions, raising essential questions about how well traditional ABA practices align with what clients value. All right, so if Kara, you can take it away, please.
We will first discuss the Anderson 2023 study, which looked at several individuals who had experiences within the ABA field. This study specifically evaluated individuals who are now adults who had received ABA services as kids and discussed what they thought were the good and the bad of the services that they received. The following article by Baden discusses the social validity of different interventions used in ABA and breaks down different goals into categories such as controversial and uncontroversial goals, along with social goals. Lastly, we will discuss the BACB goals of 3.212, advocating for appropriate services, and 2.2.15, minimizing risk of behavior change interventions.
Thank you so much for that. All right, Nani, if you could help us by explaining the articles.
Absolutely. So quickly, the Anderson article first, they interviewed 18 autistic adults about their experiences with ABA. The participants described practices like extinction of stimming, forced eye contact, and compliance training as harmful and misaligned with affirming values. So many reported long term emotional effects, including anxiety and trauma, and felt pressured to mask their identities. So some saw no future for ABA, while others called for a shift towards autonomy, informed consent, and goals based on client values. Though limited by a small self selected sample, the study amplifies voices often excluded from ABA research and urges reflection on whether current practices truly support neurodivergent well being. So there's a second article from Baden, which surveyed autistic adults, caregivers, and professionals on the social validity of 19 common ABA goals. Only 10 were widely endorsed, with goals like reducing stimming, increasing eye contact, and improving school readiness receiving little support, especially from autistic adults. Autistic participants were significantly less likely than professionals to endorse goals aimed at appearing more neurotypical. While the study measured perceived acceptability rather than outcomes, it highlights a disconnect between traditional ABA goals and what autistic individuals value. So, reinforcing the call for more individual affirming care.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Let's hear from Madison for the next infographic.
All right, so on the right side of the slide again, we see another infographic. This one is taken from the Baden article, and it shows the different intervention goals that were assessed throughout the study. So they were separated into three separate categories based on the percentage of people who endorsed that goal. So those categories included an uncontroversial category, a controversial category, and then also a social category. So in the uncontroversial category, we have reducing danger, reducing self-injurious behaviors, improving quality of life, and increasing independence, as well as toileting. And then under the controversial category, it includes reducing inattention or hyperactivity, improving sensory intolerance, reducing picky eating, reducing noncompliance, increasing eye contact, reducing vocal and motor stimming, and then finally reducing fixations. And then the third category, which was the social category, that included improving social communication skills, improving interpersonal skills, learning rules of interaction, improving conversation ability, and increasing school readiness. Increasing school readiness was actually the only goal in the social category that wasn't endorsed by the majority of participants, with about 49.1% of people endorsing that goal. And then the highest endorsed goal was reducing danger, and the lowest endorsed goal was reducing fixations. So these findings show that while some interventions are widely accepted, there are also quite a few interventions that are not widely accepted or even opposed by the autistic community. So yes, that is a summary of that.
Thank you so much. All right, Ayla, let's hear from you.
Okay, so as we've seen in the articles that we've just discussed, or as we've heard, many members of the neurodiverse community, they do not support the use of ABA, or if they do support ABA, they don't support certain interventions used by practitioners. So it is the responsibility of the behavior analyst to make sure they are advocating for their client. And this includes advocating for appropriate services that do not cause harm to the client, and as said in Standard 3.12 of the BACB Ethics Code for behavioral analysts. So along with this Standard 2.15 of the Ethics Code states that behavioral analysts must minimize the risk of behavior change interventions. The opinions of autistic individuals who have received ABA services in the past makes one wonder whether or not behavior analysts are doing enough to reduce the harm when implementing interventions. So one of the questions that was brought to the forefront is if ABA is not widely accepted by the neurodiverse community, should it still be considered a standard of care for treating autism spectrum disorder? So with this, I would say, and everybody, you guys can join in with me to answer this question, I would say that maybe not the standard for all individuals that are in the neurodiverse community, because everybody is so, autism is such, it's a spectrum, so it's very individualized. So I do feel that as long as it does not cause harm, so many individuals can benefit from it. And then there are individuals who may, disagree. But I do feel that ABA helps definitely with giving a quality of life, teaching skills, and just, again, all around teaching a quality of life. But I do understand the forcing of the being normal on individuals that are neurodivergent. Um, Certain things like stimming could be frowned upon, or you're told to act normal, and that does suppress you being an individual, expressing yourself as an individual. So I can see where the neurodivergent community may not agree, and then I can see where, they can agree and others can agree as well.
I'll add to this a little bit. No, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think that it really depends on the individual too, with how like because they're all different, like you said. So I think it should still be a standard of care, but kind of just talking with the clients and kind of discussing their needs as well.
So I completely agree. I also believe that it should continue to be a standard of care for treating ASD. It is an evidence-based practice and it's been proven to be effective. Um, However, I do think that there should still be an emphasis on the fact that it has caused harm in the past, and that it's very important to listen to autistic individuals, and that we as a field should try to learn and grow from this, and find ways to improve and reduce harm.
All right, guys, thank you so much for that question and your opinions on it. We're going to move on to our next point, autonomy as core values. So autonomy is empowering clients to take an active role in their treatment. The BACV Ethics Code and Core emphasizes the need to promote decision-making, dignity, and meaningful participation. Tinkani et al. And Desi and Ryan provide compelling evidence that autonomy supports motivation, supports learning, and long-term well-being. We'll now hear from our summarizer. Oh, can you turn on your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. We first start off by discussing the meaning of autonomy, which gives the right for people to make their own decisions. Desi and Ryan, 1987, go into more depth about how behavior that is based on choices that are made and the behavior that are controlled by other environmental factors. They then go into more detail about how the choices and autonomy that has one effect that can affect the motivation an individual has about a certain task. Takani also talked about specifically more of the ABA surfaces more in depth and how ABA can teach children with disabilities to make choices for themselves, which further enhances the prioritization of autonomy. We then will discuss the core principles of treating others with compassion, followed by going more into depth on how the BACB codes of 2.09 involving clients and stakeholders and 3.01 responsibility to clients correlate with promoting autonomy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, Nani, if you could take it away, please.
Absolutely. So the first article by Desi and Ryan introduced self-determination theory, which identifies autonomy, competence, and relatedness as key to motivation and well-being. So they found that when people feel autonomous, they show greater intrinsic motivation, persistence, and learning. So critical factors in behavior change. Their work suggests that supporting client choice in ABA leads to more meaningful and lasting outcomes. While not specific to autism or ABA, the theory provides a strong foundation for emphasizing autonomy in ethical practice. So the second one from Dakani for the Article 2, it argues that ABA is well equipped to promote autonomy through tools like preference assessments, choice making, and independence training. They stress that autonomy should be a core value, not an optional add on, and call for behavior analysts to prioritize dignity, choice, and collaboration. So, though conceptual, the article builds on existing research to support a more ethical, client centered approach.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Madison, if you could describe the illustration.
Of course. So over to the right of the slide, there is information taken from the two articles that we just discussed. And so first, there is the definition of autonomy by Deci and Ryan, which is the ability to make one's own choices and decisions. And then they also describe how autonomy can affect motivation. And so they say that autonomy affects motivation, which can then in turn affect confidence as well. And then towards the bottom of the illustration, it lists two different ways that behavior analysts are able to promote autonomy. And these include teaching communication skills and then also using preference assessments when trying to identify reinforcers.
Thank you so much for describing that one. All right, moving on to our counterclaim. So we're going to be talking about safety. Some behaviors, while tied to an individual's identity, may still pose a significant safety risk to themselves or others. In these situations, it may be necessary for practitioners to intervene in order to prevent harm. Perba et al. From 2015 emphasized that aggressive behaviors in children with autism can lead to reduced quality of life and increased risk for institutional placement if not addressed. As outlined in the BACB codes 2.15 and 3.01, behavior analysts are expected to minimize risk while maintaining responsibility for client welfare. In cases where identity and safety appear to conflict, clinical judgment must prioritize protection without disregarding dignity. All right. So
All right.
Kara, can you take it from us, please?
Yes. First, we will talk about the research and results from the Perba et al. 2024 article, which discusses aggressive behaviors and how interventions need to take place in order to diminish those behaviors more quickly than allowing them to make choices for themselves. This is especially true when they are at risk of harming themselves or others. This article specifically talks about research that has been done on effective treatments and interventions that have been put in place. We then will discuss how the BACB codes of 1.03 of accountability and 2.14 selecting, designing, and implementing behavior change interventions relate to the conflict of safety of oneself and others.
Thank you so much. All right, Nani, if you could describe the article a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, PERBA actually examines aggression in children with autism and argues that while many behaviors should be accepted, aggression requires individualized, evidence based treatment to prevent harm. So, they highlight the serious risks of untreated aggression, including reduced quality of life and caregiver burden, and recommend ABA as an effective intervention. So, though the article doesn't address neurodiversity affirming perspectives, it does reinforce the ethical need when safety is at risk. So, supporting the counterclaim that acceptance should not come at the cost of well being.
Thank you so much. All right, Madison.
Okay, so to help make this point a little bit more relatable, we created a visual metaphor. So on the right side of this slide, you'll see two different plants. One is growing freely in a pot that represents affirming identity. So it shows what happens when we respect individual learning styles and use clear, compassionate communication, whereas the other plant is wilting and tangled and surrounded by rocks. So that side represents what can happen when safety is overlooked or when support is withheld in the name of letting things grow naturally. Think of a garden that's been left to grow without any care. At first, that might seem like more respectful thing to do, just let it be. However, over time, certain plants take over, block sunlight, and crowd out the rest. Without guidance or structure, the garden stops thriving. In the same way, as behavior analysts, our role isn't to control someone's growth or force them into a mold, but it also isn't to step back completely when there are real safety concerns. So, supporting someone's growth sometimes means stepping in, not to change who they are, but to help them in a way so that they can thrive and so that they're safe, supported, and it is sustainable for both them and the people around them.
Thank you so much for that. Ayla, if you could talk a little bit more on this.
Yes, so this section is very important because as a behavioral analyst, we will definitely see many different, you know, individuals, many different behaviors. So safety is a very big thing, and also making that call to know when others are in harm and when we should really intervene to take a different approach. So the question that we had here was who holds the ethical authority, I'm sorry, to determine when a behavior is too dangerous to be affirmed, and how do we ensure the decision prioritizes both the client dignity and the safety of others? So, again, like I said, this is very important, especially in behavior analysis and working with individuals who engage in dangerous behaviors. So, I'll list it in order, who holds that authority. And it can be switched around just depending as well. So I would say for one, the behavioral analyst is the primary ethical holder of the authority. Bound by the BACB Ethics Code 2.0, the behavioral analyst prioritizes, safety of that individual. Um, Number two, that person would be the interdisciplinary team. So that includes the caregivers, the educators, the physicians, the mental health professionals, and the legal guardian that are connected to this client. And of course, the client, when capable of making those decisions, the client's voice and autonomy should be prioritized to the fullest extent, as much as possible. And also, of course, the legal guardian or the stakeholders with that client. So we ensure the decision prioritizing dignity and safety by thoroughly analyzing the risk of that behavior. We want to ensure that we are keeping that individual safe as well as others and making that call and making that decision. Also evaluating less restrictive alternatives. So again, like we spoke with the claim one, we want to make sure that we are implementing interventions that are not harmful to the client or others around. And also, it would be to continue ongoing data review and supervision. A lot of times, there may be an individual who is exemplifying a dangerous behavior, but that may be something that's new. So you want to make sure you are continuing to take data on that individual to see what has changed, to see the highs and lows of that particular behavior. So if anybody else wants to join in with that, feel free.
Yeah, I will just contribute to that quickly. I completely agree with everything that you discussed. All I'll add to that is like, as the behavior analyst, uses that authority to determine that, just as you stated, I think as we've learned in the course as well, in an appropriate, informed consent matter, discussing it with people above us and maintaining our competence and ensuring that it's not just our beliefs and values coming into play
Right.
with here, and ensuring that like our own experiences aren't controlling whether this behavior is whatever it is. You know what I mean? We have people above us that understand and can help us understand what we need to do next, as well as maintaining competence, as well as ensuring that our culture of humility and responsiveness is at play throughout this whole experience. So
Right.
that's
And avoiding those personal biases too. That's really important as well.
absolutely, absolutely.
I think I wanted to absolutely agree with you guys and also emphasize that the lived experience of our clients has extreme expertise. Self-advocates have argued, certain behaviors, we've discussed it before, like stimming or not maintaining eye contact, things like that. They're not signs of pathology, but they're regulatory skills. And I think it is extremely important to just give creed to their experiences and their thoughts and practices. Um, of course, we have certain authority. We are able to give recommendations, but it should always be based on what's important to them and how they feel about the scenario and situation and behaviors that they're exhibiting. Okay. Let's move along to our following and final point, countering ableism. So, traditional ABA often targets behaviors that deviate from neurotypical norms, sometimes without considering the client's perspective or needs. But affirming practices, as discussed in Allen et al. 2024, shift the focus from normalization to empowerment. These approaches challenge the deficit model and promote identity-based goals rooted in respect, dignity, and inclusion. Again, we'll move through the following speakers one at a time, starting with our summarizer.
We will first discuss the article by Allen et al. 2024, which talks about the changes that have been made when countering ableism and specifically ABA practices. This article goes into more depth about the importance for the client and the right for individuals to make their own decisions and be able to show assent to when they're being asked to do something.
All right, thank you. Nani, if you could talk about the Allen article.
Absolutely. So the Allen article discusses how traditional ABA goals may reflect ableist assumptions while focused on normalization over individual needs. So though conceptual, the article highlights practice-based examples where affirming strategies like replacing stimming reduction with break requests or involving clients in goal setting led to improved outcomes. So the authors argue that shifting from compliance to autonomy is essential to ethical, client-centered care. While lacking empirical data, the article uses clinical insights to support more inclusive practices.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Madison, if you could talk about the infographic.
Yes. So on the right side of the slide again, you can see that we have an infographic here, and that talks about countering ableism through neurodiversity affirming ABA. So up towards the top, it mentions what ableism is, which is discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities, often through societal norms that prioritize normalcy. And then down below that, there are examples of ways that ABA can actually perpetuate ableism. So those include focusing on masking autistic traits, prioritizing compliance over communication, and then reinforcing neurotypical behaviors as the goal. And then below that, there are also ways that we can actually counter societal ableism or counter ableism through ABA. And those include teaching functional and meaningful behaviors and also seeking to understand behaviors versus seeking to fix behaviors. And then below that, there are some real world shifts that we also mentioned.
Perfect. All right, thank you for that. Let's move on to the counterclaim to this. So it's essential to recognize that avoiding intervention in the name of affirmation can sometimes have unintended consequences. Shuck et al. 2021, they warn that passive affirmation, like avoiding skill building or support entirely, may reduce long-term quality of life or limit their independence. So Lerner et al. 2023 proposed that the true affirmation involves active support that is both respectful of identity and responsive to developmental needs. So as behavior analysts, we're reminded by the BACB code to respect cultural differences while reflecting on our own biases, ensuring that all clients receive meaningful and appropriate support. Let's hear from Kara.
Shuck et al. 2021 discusses the differences typical autism interventions have been compared to the shift and focus that the neurodiversity world has taken on it. The article then talks about how there are still many changes that need to take place in order for this to still be effective. Lerner et al. 2023 specifically talks about neurodiversity affirming care and steps to go along with that. Lastly, we will discuss the BACB codes of 1.07 cultural responsiveness and diversity and 1.10 awareness of personal biases and challenges.
Alrighty, thank you. Nani, if you could talk about the Shuck and Learner articles.
Absolutely. So the first article, the Shuck article, they discuss the shift towards neurodiversity affirming care, cautioning that avoiding all structured support can limit long-term quality of life. They emphasize that affirming care should be active, evidence-based, and respectful of identity and autonomy. The article is conceptual rather than empirical, but underscores that inaction is not inherently affirming. Behavior analysts must balance support with respect for the individual. So the second article, Learner et al. Argued that affirming care means supporting identity while addressing challenges through respectful intervention. So they highlight strength-based programs like theater-based interventions that improve communication, confidence, and social skills with small studies showing positive outcomes. They caution that these models should not replace necessary skill building. Though limited by small sample sizes, the research supports the idea that affirming care can be both inclusive and effective.
All right. So that pretty much takes us to our conclusion. So we've examined the ethical promise of neurodiversity affirming care through the lenses of lived experience, autonomy, and anti-ableism, while discussing legitimate concerns about safety and clinical responsibility. Our group supports a balanced approach that centers lived experiences, autonomy, and dignity without compromising safety or clinical responsibility. So that means for BCBAs, critically evaluating interventions through a lens of compassion, cultural responsiveness, and collaboration with stakeholders. Behavior analysts must continually reflect on their practices to ensure they uphold the rights and identities of neurodivergent individuals. So thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it, and you can leave any comments or questions below. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, and feel free to leave us questions.
All right, thanks.